Imagine a family so powerful they were called the Rothschilds of the East. In 1832, they were nothing but refugees fleeing for their lives. Baghdad was behind them. The unknown lay ahead. But within a single generation, this family didn't just find safety. They found a fortune that would make kings jealous. They built the schools where your grandparents studied. They built the hospitals where lives were saved. They even built the very docks that turned Mumbai into a global superpower. But behind the marble libraries and the fancy British titles lies a secret that was buried under layers of philanthropy. This isn't just a story of success. It's a story of how a single family controlled 70% of the world's most dangerous drug trade. It's a story of how the British Empire used them to destroy an entire nation from the inside out. Buckle in, because today, we are pulling back the curtain on the invisible empire of the Sassoon family. To understand the Sassoons, we have to look at the world they left behind. The year was 1829. Baghdad was a city of ancient secrets and immense wealth, and for 800 years, the Sassoon family sat at the very top of its social hierarchy. They were the leaders of the Jewish community, carrying the title of Nasi. Sheikh Sassoon ben Saleh, the family patriarch, wasn't just a businessman. He was the chief treasurer for the Ottoman pashas who governed the region. He held the keys to the treasury. He knew where every gold coin in the city was buried. But in the world of high-stakes politics, yesterday's ally is today's target. A new, ruthlessly greedy governor named Daud Pasha took control. He looked at the Sassoon wealth not with respect, but with hunger. He began a campaign of terror. He didn't just tax the family, he began kidnapping their members and demanding astronomical ransoms that would bankrupt even the wealthiest dynasties. David Sassoon, the sheikh's son, watched as his world crumbled. He realized that in Baghdad, their wealth was a death sentence. Under the cover of a moonless night, David fled the city. He didn't have a plan, only a destination: stability. He first escaped to Persia, but he soon realized that the real power in the East was shifting toward the British. He set his sights on a small, swampy, and relatively unimportant trading post called Bombay. When David arrived in 1832, he was a stranger in a strange land. He didn't speak a word of English. He started by trading what he knew: textiles, spices, and silks. But David was a master observer. He spent his days at the docks, watching the British ships come and go. He noticed a massive, systemic weakness in the British Empire's economy. The British people were absolutely obsessed with Chinese tea. They drank it by the ton. They also wanted Chinese silk and fine porcelain. But there was a catch. The Chinese emperor in Beijing looked down on British goods. He thought British wool and machinery were crude and useless. The Chinese only accepted one form of payment: pure silver. This created a terrifying economic drain. The British Empire was literally hemorrhaging its silver reserves to pay for its tea addiction. If something didn't change, the empire would go bankrupt. The British needed a black market solution to get their silver back. That solution was a sticky, dark substance grown in the fields of India: opium. David Sassoon saw the opportunity of a lifetime. The British needed a partner who was loyal, efficient, and, most importantly, did not mind the messy moral side of the business. The British administration welcomed the Sassoons. Why? Because the Sassoons were a tiny minority. They had no political base in India. They weren't going to start a revolution or challenge British rule. They were the perfect middlemen. Before we get into how they built the largest drug network in history, I have a question for you. How does a refugee family go from zero to controlling 70% of a global market? It's about spotting the shifts in the world's financial laws. If you want to understand how empires fall when the money changes, you need to see our other deep dive: 500 years, 5 empires, 1 law, the end of the dollar. I'll leave a link for it at the end of this video. And while you're here, hit that subscribe button. We track the empires that history tried to hide. By the 1840s, David Sassoon had turned his business into a machine. He realized that to truly control a market, you couldn't rely on outsiders. He practiced what we now call vertical integration. He had 8 sons, and he used them like chess pieces. He sent them to every major port in the East: Hong Kong, Shanghai, Canton, and even back to London. The Sassoon strategy was brutal and effective. They would buy the poppy crops directly from the farmers in India, often lending them money at high interest rates to ensure they kept growing the drug. They built their own processing factories. They even built their own fleet of specialized high-speed ships called Opium Clippers. These ships were designed for one thing: outrunning the Chinese Navy. The scale of the trade was staggering. In 1836, David Sassoon and Company shipped 30,000 chests of opium to the Chinese coast. Each chest weighed 120 pounds. We are talking about millions of pounds of narcotics flowing into a country where the drug was technically illegal. The Chinese government wasn't blind. They saw their people becoming shadows of themselves. Millions of addicts in the coastal cities, from high-ranking officials to the poorest laborers. In 1839, the Chinese emperor finally had enough. He sent a high commissioner to Canton who seized and destroyed over 20,000 chests of opium, a significant portion of which belonged to the Sassoons and their British partners. This was the spark. The Sassoons and other merchant houses lobbied the British Parliament. They didn't call it a drug war, they called it a war for free trade. The British sent their ironclad steamships and crushed the Chinese wooden junk boats. The result was the Treaty of Nanking. China was forced to pay for the destroyed opium. They had to open 5 treaty ports to foreign trade, and they had to hand over the island of Hong Kong. For the Sassoons, this was the ultimate victory. The doors to China were now kicked wide open. Their trade volume didn't just double, it exploded. By the 1860s, it was estimated that the Sassoon family controlled 70% of the total opium trade in the East. They were making so much money that the British government, which was usually very racist toward its colonial subjects, actually inducted David Sassoon into the British nobility. Think about that for a second. A man who arrived as a refugee who still spoke with a thick accent and wore Eastern robes was now a peer of the British Empire. But as the money poured in, David Sassoon knew he had a branding problem. He didn't want his family name to be synonymous with addiction and misery. He began one of the most successful image-washing campaigns in history. He poured his opium profits into legitimate infrastructure. He built the Sassoon docks in Bombay, the first wet docks in Western India which revolutionized the city's trade. He built the David Sassoon Library, an architectural masterpiece. He built hospitals, technical schools, and synagogues. To the people of Bombay, he wasn't a drug lord, he was the merchant prince. He provided thousands of jobs in his massive textile mills. He was a pillar of the community. He spent his mornings in deep religious prayer and his afternoons calculating the price of poppy seeds. In his mind, the two worlds never touched. When David died in 1864, he left behind a dynasty that was ready to go global. His eldest son, Albert, took over the reins. Albert was different from his father. He didn't want to live in the shadow of the Bombay docks. He wanted to sit at the table with the King of England. Albert moved to London and became the ultimate social climber. He threw lavish parties that were attended by the Prince of Wales, the future King Edward VII. Albert became so influential that he was the first Jew ever to be awarded the Freedom of the City of London, an honor that not even the famous Rothschilds had received at that time. To solidify their power, the Sassoons did what all great empires do. They married into other dynasties. Albert's son, Edward, married Aileen Caroline de Rothschild. The Rothschilds of the East had finally merged with the Rothschilds of the West. But the seeds of destruction are often buried in the very success they create. After David's death, the family began to fracture. His second son, Elias, felt that Albert was taking too much credit and too much of the profit. In a move that shocked the business world, Elias broke away and started a rival firm, E.D. Sassoon and Company. The two branches of the family became bitter enemies. Instead of working together to maintain their monopoly, they spent decades trying to ruin each other. They undercut each other's prices and fought over the same opium routes. The invisible empire was now an empire at war with itself. By the early 20th century, a new problem emerged. The world was changing. Moral outrage against the opium trade was growing both in Europe and in China. The dirty source of their wealth was becoming a social liability. The third and fourth generations of Sassoons didn't have the hunger of their grandfather David. They didn't want to manage smelly warehouses or negotiate with drug runners. They wanted to be English aristocrats. They spent their fortunes on thoroughbred horse racing, massive country estates like Trent Park, and world-class art collections. One family member, Siegfried Sassoon, became one of the greatest poets of the First World War. He was a man of immense talent and sensitivity, but he famously despised the source of his family's wealth, once mocking it as money made in the East by dirty trading. The final blow came in the 1930s and 40s. The rise of communism in China led to the nationalization of all foreign assets. In Shanghai, where the Sassoons had invested over $1 billion in luxury real estate and hotels, everything was seized overnight. The invisible empire that had been built on poppies, ships, and British protection simply evaporated. Today, the Sassoon name is still etched into the stone of buildings in Mumbai and Shanghai. But the family themselves have faded into the background of the British upper class. They are the perfect example of a historical cycle. They started as exiles, rose as titans of a forbidden trade, laundered their image through charity, and finally disappeared into the very aristocracy they once served. Their money didn't truly disappear. It just changed form. It moved into private banks, offshore trusts, and various names you wouldn't recognize today. Because fortunes this big rarely die. They just go back into the shadows. The Sassoons knew that to survive, you have to follow the money and the law of the empire. But what happens when the current global empire faces its own financial cliff? You need to watch our video. 500 years, 5 empires, 1 law, the end of the dollar. It explains the pattern that every empire, including the Sassoons, has had to face. Click the video on your screen now to see what's coming next. Thanks for watching Invisible Empires. I'll see you in the next one.